Ladies and gentlemen, the South Asian Nitrogen Hub was a recently completed 5-year multinational project which was focused on sustainable nitrogen management. It was funded by the UKRI. Professor Dr. Mark Sutton from the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology was the director of this project. Professor Dr. Mark Sutton has supported Pakistan in tabling the draft on sustainable nitrogen during COP29 last year, and he is still supporting us for this draft, which is going to be presented in the UNEA 7. I would request Professor Mark Sutton to please discuss why there is a need for a new resolution and what are the expectations from Pakistan. Professor Mark.
Yes, thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be with you, at least electronically, this morning, if not physically. First of all, I really want to thank you all for the wonderful efforts you've been putting onto this topic. The Ministry of Climate Change, you've shown yourself really to be leaders and with determination. And thank you also to the chief guest for the opening remarks, which I think really set the scene very clearly. So I should say that I'm a scientist. Originally, I was a botanist, and then I was an air quality scientist. And then I started engaging in policy, and in that world found out that, in fact, everything is linked. And nitrogen is a wonderful illustration of how everything is linked. As we've heard, nitrogen is linking challenges of water quality, air quality, the climate balance, ecosystems, soils. We also hear how nitrogen is now the major contribution to stratospheric ozone depletion going forward. The CFCs, chlorofluorocarbons, have been largely addressed, or that work is in play, but the work to reduce the nitrous oxide emissions is still to come. So nitrogen is somehow a pan-dimensional challenge, and that's a challenge which we as scientists have started to be grappling with. I think the first thing is that it means that we need to learn from each other. None of us has all the expertise on all those different things. And we need to listen to each other's concerns. And I think that then takes us to the first question going forward to the United Nations Environment Assembly as to, is nitrogen a threat or is it an opportunity? And of course, we can all see threats from different dimensions. Nitrogen pollution is a threat to water and is a threat to air. But there can be fears that addressing nitrogen pollution might be a threat to food security. We've heard how important nitrogen is for crop and plant growth. Every amino acid in our body is a nitrogen compound, every protein, a DNA, etc. And I think the first thing is sometimes that we need to manage fears and we need to be very clear about those. So, for example, people might say, if you use less fertilizer, that's going to be a risk for food security. And I think in our work and getting everything together, seeing all the parts of the puzzle, what has become clear to us is that nitrogen pollution is actually a loss of valuable resources. So rather than saying we reduce inputs, which might challenge food security, we would rather turn it around and say, let's reduce the amount of wasted nitrogen resources. With higher efficiency, less losses, less waste of resources, that means the available nitrogen resources will go further. So just to take a very simple measure, I work particularly on ammonia. If you can smell a manure heap, the smell of that manure heap is the nitrogen being lost to the atmosphere. So a manure heap with some sort of cover, keeping the goodness into the nitrogen resource is good for farming, good for the environment. So one way to look at it is to turn it into money. And if we were to value nitrogen in the simplest way possible, which is the value on the basis of a fertilizer price. Now, we know that fertilizer prices tripled in 2022. Let's take a base cost of $1 per kilogram of nitrogen, going up in 2022 to $3 per kilogram of nitrogen. And if there are 200 million tons of nitrogen wasted to the environment, to air pollution and to water pollution, times that by 1 or 3, that is $200 billion to $600 billion, that is, worth of nitrogen resources wasted. So that means efforts to look at reducing those losses can obviously contribute really substantially to economy. And it means then that if we're wasting less, we don't need so much inputs, and that's where the profit opportunity comes. So my message would be that whether countries are in excess of supply of nitrogen or don't have enough, wasting less is good for us all because it's good for environment and good for food security. So let's come forward to the United Nations Environment Assembly. Thanks again to you as Pakistan for taking leadership the previous UNEAs and preparing the way. As the previous speaker has mentioned, I think a key word there is revitalize, because there have been the resolution in 2019. That resolution was very simple. It set the way to say there is nitrogen. We need to take note of it. Let's look at opportunities to work better together. One of those challenges set was to consider options for better coordination of nitrogen policies. And those options are still being considered. And we as scientists in the International Nitrogen Management System have laid out, really in simple terms, 4 options. The first option for better coordination is the status quo. We have fragmentation between existing policy processes internationally and, of course, nationally too. We want to do better than that. The second option is to say, well, one of the existing intergovernmental processes might take the lead. And the problem with that is that they don't have the mandate to do all the different dimensions that nitrogen covers. So the Climate Convention and the Biodiversity Convention have their own different mandates, the Seas Conventions, so air conventions. These are all different policy processes. So how can they tread on each other's toes? That's not helpful. The third option is to say that there should be a new convention, a new treaty. We see a lot of concern like that by policymakers who say, well, haven't we got already very many policy processes? Should not we be working with them? And that leads to a fourth option, which is for better coordination of policies between. So we've called and identified together with you to something towards an interconvention coordination mechanism or intergovernmental coordination mechanism that gets everybody working better together, listening to what each of the intergovernmental processes are doing and stimulating the lessons learned between them. Now, the first resolution has led to the establishment of, I would say, an interim body, the Nitrogen Working Group. It's a starting point. It's starting working on that. But there's really still a need, it's still open to establish a durable intergovernmental mechanism with clearly laid out agreed terms of references between the countries and how to get there, how to do it in an efficient way, in a way that maximizes the benefits. So that challenge is still there. It was not resolved in the second resolution, which simply said to start looking at the modalities of that, meaning the further details. And that's still for the third resolution to push things forward. So that's really the first challenge of that resolution. The second challenge, I think, is to come towards pushing forward on national nitrogen action plans. That's only been starting now. It was called for in the second resolution. It raised that would be a thing. That's great, but there's really no agreement as to how national nitrogen action plans should look. And that's an opportunity for governments to discuss and agree to what extent would you like to harmonize your efforts so that you can share and consider common benefits. I don't take a view on the level of detail there, but it's clearly a conversation that the new resolution needs to be stimulating. The third heading is, I would say, about nitrogen finance, or we frame it as nitro finance. Nitro is an interesting word because it also means to go faster. If you see nitro written on a surfboard, it's because nitro means to go faster. Originally, the idea was to put nitrous oxide into a racing car engine and it would speed the engine up. So nitro means nitrogen, but of course, go faster. So how to go faster with nitrogen finance? And firstly, we need to see a conversation about defining that as a valid finance mechanism. And let's keep it really simple. Those wasted resources, those billions of wasted resources, we would like to not waste them. That would be good for the economy. But often you need investment to do that. And we would argue that many measures that you might invest in, let's say a farmer wants to buy a new piece of agricultural equipment that ultimately will reduce losses. That equipment might need some money, pay for it, then the investment, and of course, then looking towards the payback period, because with wasting less fertilizers were needed. So nitro finance can operate on a farm scale, it can operate on an international country scale. The resolution is looking to frame and discuss more about a nitrogen finance mechanism. And lastly, I take one last topic, which is an emerging risk, the emerging risk of nitrogen in fuel. This is might seem quite surprising because until now we've been using carbon as our fuel. Fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, you burn the carbon compound, it goes to carbon dioxide. And of course, the world is looking to try to stop those losses. So one option is to use renewable energy to make ammonia, a nitrogen compound, and burn that, leading back to atmospheric dinitrogen and water, no CO2. However, there are risks in that, and there's currently no international environmental process that's looking at all the risks associated with nitrogen fuel. And so essentially that fourth challenge of the resolution is to call for attention and analysis of this so that the benefits can be there while looking to ensure that it's not increasing pollution. So I think, as the previous chief guest has announced, the word revitalise is clearly there. The current resolution really says for action beyond 2030 and beyond, but it has no specific tasks. And clearly the resolution going ahead has really a work to set the agenda for the next 10 or so years on going forward. And those are some of the priorities for you to discuss. With that, thanks very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, Professor Mark.